it going? So today I want to talk about the 5 rules of spelling natural major scales. You know, I say that these are 5 rules, but these are more like 5 things that I've noticed and that have helped me kind of keep in between the lines when I'm trying to figure all this stuff out. This helped me out a lot when I first started learning a little bit about music theory, and hopefully it will help you as well. But let's start with the first rule. So, rule number 1, the scale has to start on the root and end on the root. So the root note being the first note in the scale, the note that gives the scale its name. Let's use C as an example, okay? So C has to be at the very beginning. It's marked with a number 1, and you can play a scale and not play the root note, but it needs to have it in order for it to exist, if that makes sense. That probably doesn't make sense. Anyway. Rule number 2, all 7 letters of the musical alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, have to be represented in the major scale, whether or not they are sharp or flat. It doesn't matter. Just to show you an example of 2 different scales, I'm sticking with C major for now, but the C major scale, along with all 11 other natural major scales, they have 7 notes in them. This is known as a diatonic scale. So it is a 7-note scale. A scale outside of this whole diatonic 7-note world would be what's known as a pentatonic scale. So pentatonic meaning a 5-note scale. Penta, 5, tonic meaning tones or notes. We'll get into that later, but here's an example of, just the big differences. So obviously you see here we have the C major scale. We have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, 7 notes there. What we're doing to create the C major pentatonic scale is we're getting rid of 2 of the notes out of this exact same scale. So if only 5 out of the 7 notes are being represented in the scale, it's a different sounding scale. Rule number 3, use the intervallic pattern of whole step, half step, whole step, half step. In other words, use whole, half, whole, half. So starting from the root note, you have to measure out a whole step, and then from there you measure out another whole step, and then half step, then whole step, half step. Let's try that out right now actually with C major. Okay, so here we are. We have our root note C. So what we're gonna do now is apply the pattern of whole, half, whole, half to spell our C major scale. So starting on C, we go 1 whole step, which is gonna bring us to D. Then from there, we take another whole step, which brings us to E. From E, we go a half step, which is gonna bring us to F. So remember, the distance from E to F and B to C is only a half step. Then we go a whole step from F to bring us out to G. Another whole step from G brings us to A. A whole step from A brings us to B. And then finally, bring in the last half step to bring us all the way back to C. Rule number 4, sharps and flats cannot coexist in the same scale. So what does that mean? Let's take a look at a B major scale, for example. B major scale is spelt B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, and finally B. Now, let's say that we wanted to go from the 2nd note to the 3rd note, C sharp to D sharp, but we wanted to call D sharp E flat, because D sharp's enharmonic equivalent is E flat. E flat and D sharp are the same note, right? They have the same name. If you don't remember this, go back to the video where I was talking about enharmonic equivalence, and this will all make more sense. We can't have a C sharp and then all of a sudden skip D sharp altogether and just go to E flat, because it breaks 2 rules at the same time. It breaks the rule of sharps and flats cannot coexist in the same scale, and it also breaks the rule of having every letter of the musical alphabet be represented in the scale. It all has to follow alphabetical order. In this case, with the B major scale, it would have to be B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B. If we swapped out D sharp for an E flat, for example, it would look really strange if we saw B, C sharp, E flat, E, F sharp, it becomes redundant, if that makes sense. It just gets really confusing, and then the order just gets disrupted. Just to keep things simple, sharp notes and flat notes cannot coexist in the scale. Just remember that. And finally, rule number 5, note names cannot repeat in the scale. Aside from the root note, obviously. That's the only note name that's going to repeat in the scale. So we have our B major scale here, and if you'll notice, the pattern of intervals is the same: whole step, half step, whole step, half step. And the result of those spacings gives us each note of the alphabet. So starting from B, we have C sharp, and then D sharp, and then E, then F sharp, and G sharp, and A sharp, all the way back to B. Even if it is a sharp note, it's still in alphabetical order. So hopefully that's a simple enough thing to remember. Consider it a hack, I guess, if you want. But notes follow alphabetical order, as you can see. Sharps and flats do not coexist in the scale. And note names other than the root note do not repeat in the scale. Rule number 1, the scale has to start on the root and end on the root. Rule number 2, all 7 letters of the musical alphabet have to be represented in the major scale, whether or not they are sharp or flat. Rule number 3, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Rule number 4, sharps and flats cannot coexist in the same scale. And finally, rule number 5, note names cannot repeat in the scale. So that's it for right now. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And for detailed slides of everything that I'm talking about right now, click the link in the description, and I'll see you soon.